kings, first and foremost.
A truce was declared for the cremation of Hector's body. Funeral laments were sung. The flames from the fire consumed his corpse, and watching over are the walls of Troy.
Homer does not elect for a Hollywood ending. He elects for an ending which reminds us that more slaughter is to follow. Homer is saying to us, his audience, in a way, you are not to be trusted. More havoc will surely follow. More brutality, more carnage, and ultimately, too, the destruction of Troy.
Although this completed Homer's story, the true story of Troy did not end there. Suddenly, the Greeks were gone, and a wooden horse was standing outside the gates of Troy. The most famous symbol of Troy, the Trojan horse, comes from legends other than Homer's Iliad.
The legend tells us that this was a war that was not won by uncommon acts of valor, by steadfastness and military discipline, all the qualities that we might expect. On the contrary, it was won by a devastating ruse. It was won by deception, deceit, and conspiracy, and all the things that we might consider to be dishonorable in the conduct of warfare.
After 10 years of battle, the Greeks and Trojans fought to a stalemate. Then a Greek named Odysseus came up with a plan. The Greeks built a giant wooden horse, left it as an offering to the Trojans, and then sailed away. Some Trojans were skeptical, with one, Laocoon, warning, "Beware Greeks bearing gifts." But according to myth, he and his sons were silenced by serpents that dragged them into the sea. The Trojans desperately wanted to believe that the horse was a peace offering.
And the Trojans broke their walls down to let the horse enter, stuffed full as it was with Greek soldiers. And in the night, as the Trojans were celebrating the departure of the Greeks, down came the Greeks out of the wooden horse, let in their companions, and proceeded to rape, pillage, and destroy.
By hiding in the belly of the wooden horse and tricking the Trojans into lowering their guard, the Greeks could finally penetrate the massive walls of Troy. All of Hector's fears were about to come true.
Priam was slaughtered at his own altar. Cassandra was raped. And the infant son of Hector was thrown from the walls of Troy, his brains dashed out.
With Hector's mother and father hacked to pieces, his sister sacrificed, his son murdered, and his wife carried off to the bed of a conquering Greek, his family was wiped from the earth forever. For the Greeks, this hard-earned victory meant honor restored, the riches of Troy, and Helen. Although there was plenty of archaeological evidence of Troy being destroyed, could the legend of the Trojan horse also be true?
The Trojan horse has become something of a metaphor for trickery, for being able to outwit your opponent, for having something that is so carefully contrived of an artifice that you're given an overwhelming advantage. The idea that the Greeks would have in fact built a large wooden horse, hidden inside it, and had it dragged inside of Troy is certainly possible, but it kind of strains your credulity a little bit that someone really could have pulled that off. My inclination is to see in the Trojan horse some kind of a representation, vaguely remembered, of siege equipment, the weaponry that can be brought up against walls to either bring them down or to somehow neutralize them.
Hittites and Assyrians possessed siege technology. It's possible this Bronze Age weapon of mass destruction could have inspired the legend of the Trojan horse. But whether history or myth, the Trojan horse came to symbolize a war won by trickery and deception.
What the legend seems to be telling us is that even though this war was fought for a just cause of sorts, and even though in the end right won, in the sense that the Greeks were victors, nonetheless that victory was at such cost that it put into question the whole validity of the war itself.
Achilles met his death by being struck in the heel by an arrow from the bow of Paris. Odysseus was doomed to wander for another 10 long years before returning home. Menelaus prepared to kill Helen, his unfaithful wife, but when he saw her naked beauty, dropped his sword. They too took 10 years to find their way back to Sparta. And as for Agamemnon, on his first night home in Mycenae, Clytemnestra, his queen, having never forgiven her husband for the sacrifice of their daughter, assassinated him in his victory bath.
So the homecoming of the Greeks was for them as devastating as was the destruction of Troy.
History tells us that in the wake of the Trojan War, not only do the Mycenaean kingdoms collapse, but the entire Bronze Age comes to an end. There is much speculation as to its cause: civil war, outside invaders, or a string of devastating earthquakes. Greece fell into a dark age for the next 500 years, until the time of Homer. What survived through those dark ages was the story of Troy.
If you contextualize this war and you see what comes after that, the decline, the catastrophes, the economic collapse, the Greeks never managed again for the next 400 years to come together as a nation. That was most probably the last glorious event before the disintegration, before the dissolution and the fragmentation of the Mycenaean world. And I think that's why it stayed in the memory.
And as Homer sang the stories of Troy, the rage of Achilles, the beauty of Helen, and the valor of Hector, his songs inspired the invention of the Greek alphabet, and the Iliad and Odyssey become the foundation of Western literature.
The Iliad and the Odyssey had enormous impact in the Archaic period, the 7th, 6th, 5th centuries BC. And so, by extension, it's not surprising that people wanted to go to the site where that war was believed to have taken place. Then the residents realized that they need to market the city very aggressively, almost like a Disneyland of antiquity.
The site of Troy rose from ruin to major tourist destination. Ancient burial mounds were turned into monuments to Greek and Trojan heroes. Temples and theaters were built to their gods, and maidens reenacted scenes from the fall of Troy.
They would sing sections of the Iliad and the Odyssey in the agora, in the marketplace of the city, right in front of the old Bronze Age fortification walls.
As the city was rebuilt, history and myth became one, and Troy became a war prize in a worldwide conflict.
The Trojan War, among other things, resonates because, from the perspective of many people, in antiquity, down to the present time, it was a conflict between East and West.
In a way, it's the beginning of the combative stances of both sides. It's us against them.
But the ancient tourist destination of Troy attracted more than just tourists. First, the Persian king Xerxes stopped at the site in 480 BC, on his way to sack Greece, claiming to avenge his Trojan ancestors. Then, in 334 BC, Alexander the Great stopped by to pay homage to Achilles on his way to Persia.
He goes to the Temple of Athena, where he saw a range of armaments associated with the Trojan War. And he looked at the armor that was presented there, chose one set of armor to wear himself in his battle against the Persians. I like to think that it would be that of Achilles, although we don't know that for certain, and then goes off to fight the Persians wearing Trojan War armor.
Alexander the Great conquered Persia, avenging Greece, and reclaimed Troy as part of the Western world. Just as Alexander linked himself to the Greek hero Achilles, Julius Caesar claimed lineage to the Trojan hero Aeneas. And Rome adopted Troy as its mother city. But the Romans embraced more than a mythological connection to Troy. They also modeled their ideal soldier on that of the Trojan hero Hector.
The Romans would say that the ideal soldier was disciplined, was a team player, was willing to sacrifice himself for the welfare of others, was willing to efface his personal glory for the good of the whole.
The military success of the Roman legions is a tribute to the legacy of the Trojans. Even though the Greeks originally defeated the Trojans were avenged when Rome defeated Greece.
It's ironic that the Trojan refugees led by Aeneas are purported to have been the ancestors of the Romans, and the Romans in turn conquered the Greeks. And so it's as if history came full circle. The Trojans were conquered and then became the conquerors.
Troy and its stories are the oldest uninterrupted memories of our world. Troy's beauty, language, power, sacrifice, vanity, honor, deceit, and war. From literature to archaeology, history to mythology, Homer to Hollywood, the question of whether Troy was real or not hardly seems to matter. The search for the true story of Troy will live forever.